Well, hey folks, real awesome Witch and Ritalin. Here's a retro review for the WWE MSG show from January 23rd, 1984. Why is this show so important? Well, for longtime wrestling fans and people who know their history, you're already going to know. For those that maybe don't know their history or are newer fans, this is the night where Hulk Hogan defeated the Iron Sheik to win the WWF title and hold it for just over 4 years. Which would actually end up being the last time that anybody would hold it for that length of time. With the exception of a couple other just over year-long reigns, nobody has even come close to holding it for 4 years, which is probably a good thing because at that time you could hold a title for 4 years with less pay-per-views and some big events and stuff like that. And more syndicated TV and not nearly enough cable TV, you could get away with that kind of stuff. But this was a landmark show for that reason. And I'm going to get into the card a little bit later. But, or into that match in a little bit later in the card. But you have Gorilla Monsoon and Pat Patterson on commentary, and they did fine. They did well. Monsoon was clearly the better of the two on commentary. Patterson was never really all that good on commentary. Or a lot of things, but I'm not going to get into that. You already know, but if you know about the Pat Patterson controversies and scandals, you probably got a pretty good idea what I'm referring to. But you get the first match. Jose Luis Rivera versus Tony Garea, and I don't think Tony Garea wrestled much after this. I think this was during the twilight of his career. The crowd was booing a lot of the groundwork, which it wasn't bad. It was like a 7-8 minute match. Rivera goes for a high cross body at the end. Hits it, but Garea reverses it and gets the 1-2-3, and the crowd popped. Maybe just for the fact the match was over. It was an okay match. It was a decent opener. But then we get Mr. Fuji and Tiger Chun-Li, not the Street Fighter one, versus the Invaders. And I believe one of the Invaders may have been Jose Gonzalez. And if that's the case, that is the murdering scumbag that killed Bruiser Brody and never faced the consequences for it. So fuck that guy. I really hope that, I really honestly, I'm just so fucking livid that motherfucker never faced the consequences for murdering somebody. It's absolutely fucking ridiculous. But that being said, putting that aside and just focusing on the in-ring work, because this was before that, this was 1984, the match was well worked. The Invaders are super over. Fuji and Tiger were great heels. A lot of quick tags from the Invaders. End up going the full time limit, which I don't know why I went the full time limit. I think you probably could have gone 15, had the Invaders win or had somebody win, because Fuji at this point really wasn't all that mobile. I think this might have been the last year he wrestled, because he ended up becoming a manager pretty soon after this. He worked well here, and the match was fine. The tag match actually was fine. Putting just it on in-ring work, the match was fine. And then we get the Masked Superstar, which I believe was Bill Eadie, who would later become Demolition Axe, versus Chief Jay Strongbow. It was alright. It was slow. There was this, hard elbow that the Masked Superstar hit and got the victory for the 1-2-3. So, yeah, it was okay. Then the show picks up a big. You get Sergeant Slaughter versus Ivan Putski, and they had a pretty good clash. It was a big power clash. Ivan was closer to the end of his career here. He did wrestle for years after this, but Slaughter was much more on the ascent, even though he had also been wrestling for a few years himself. Crowd popped big for Sergeant Slaughter. He was one of the few that got theme music here. And that was because it was odd to hear theme music for that many wrestlers back in that day, even for the bigger companies. Only the big stars really got their, their music. Otherwise, people would just come down to the ring, and then they would get pelted with stuff if they were heels, or they would get cheered like crazy and fondled and all that stuff that they were like the Von Erichs. Man, the Von Erichs got brutalized during their entrances, especially in the Sportatorium. Good God. I will also be doing a retro review of the David Von Erich Memorial Show, which I want to say was April or May of 1984. I have it written down on a list, so I will do that. But basically, this was actually quite fun. It was a good power matchup. Putski was super over, so was Sarge. Sarge did bleed at one point. Not like in the boot camp match he had with Pat Patterson. But the crowd was really, really electric. They did have a brawl afterwards. Sergeant Slaughter ended up winning by countout somehow. And they brawled, they kept brawling, and it was fine. It was a good way to have both guys get on the card, get the hot crowd even hotter, because there was then, I don't want to say a cool down match, but a match that would just set the tone for what would happen, just like the next match after. So we have a Mean Gene interview with Paul Orndorff. That was fine, Paul Orndorff. at first, doing some stuff and almost not being heelish, and then just going full on heel and everything, saying that, he's Mr. Wonderful and he's better than anybody in WWF and or WWE now. But he had a fine interview. Paul Orndorff always could really, really cut a good interview. And then you had Roddy Piper, accompanying Paul Orndorff to the ring to face Salvatore Bellomo. He was pretty much the residential jobber. I want to say he was the guy that faced Bobby Heenan in one of Bobby Heenan's only matches during Bobby Heenan's early run in the WWE. But this was actually fine. It was mostly a showcase for Orndorff, but Bellomo did get quite a few shots in and quite a few near falls. There was some good stuff, but you had, in the end, had a pile driver, 1, 2, 3, and Paul Orndorff gets the victory. And you get Hulk Hogan versus the Iron Sheik for the WWF title. Now, putting aside the insane amount of burials that Hogan did in his career and the insane amount of times that he would not put over Randy Savage or so many others, like Shawn or Orton or many others, focusing on this match, Vince McMahon had already begun his national expansion. One of the big reasons that he was able to wipe out a lot of companies and wipe out a lot of competition was because of a guy like Hulk Hogan. For better or worse, Hulk Hogan was box office. I'm not saying he still is, because he is one of the most recognizable names in wrestling, but he was box office. He was getting over in the AWA. Vern didn't put the title on him. That was a really dumb thing that Vern didn't do. Something that would come back to haunt him, because that company was not doing that well by 86, and especially by 87. But I digress. That's another story for another day. Or they weren't doing well by 88. If Super Clash 3 tells you anything, and yes, I did a review of that. You can check that out on the old school reviews playlist if you'd like. But this was insane. The Iron Sheik got a ton of heat, obviously, and he was the definition of a transitional champion. He had defended the title a couple times, I believe one time against Tito Santana, and maybe a couple others. I don't remember the exact opponents, but he had Freddie Blassie with him. Well, Ayatollah Blassie, which was kind of funny. Blassie just looked like he was just wearing like a sheet over his head. Not even like it was like traditional headdress. It's like he was wearing a sheet over his head. But this was insane. The Real American theme kicked off. Hogan had only been back with the company for a month. I believe Bob Backlund brought him in and was like, hey, I'm going to bring in this American hero. Because Hogan had just left the AWA a few weeks prior. And all this audience came over and was like, okay, we want to see Hogan. We like Hogan. We want to see Hogan win the AWA title. But he didn't. And then he beat the Iron Sheik. And the Iron Sheik was somebody that was a mainstay in the AWA for a while. And all over. He was certainly, super popular. And even if you remember, there was an interview that Iron Sheik did where he talked about how Vern Gagne offered him $100,000 to, I believe, take the title, not put over Hogan, take the title and come to the AWA. And Sheik, to his credit, Iron Sheik, to his credit, did not do that. He would not do that. He was like, the McMahons have also been good to me. You have been good to me, Vern. I believe Sheik was one of the people that helped run that training camp that had guys like Ric Flair, Ricky Steamboat, and so many others there. Ken Patera, and just tons of other people. So Sheik had a major connection with, Iron Sheik had a major connection with Vern Gagne. And it was not that Vern wasn't good to him, but McMahon Sr. and even McMahon Jr. was really good to Iron Sheik. To his credit, he put over Hogan, clean as a goddamn whistle. Hogan attacked him from behind to start the match, and, because of course, Hogan, being the babyface that he is, would do that. But then Sheik would put on the camel clutch. Did not work. Hogan powered out of it. Soon after, big boot, leg drop, 1, 2, 3. Crowd goes absolutely insane, and the new hero is made. And yeah, you could argue the 4-year title reign of Hogan started to cause more damage at that point, by the time it was near the end. But at this time, Hogan was super goddamn over. And I mean super, super over. And it was insane. It was great to hear MSG that loud. Madison Square Garden, the Garden. It was great to hear the hallowed halls of Madison Square Garden that electric. So yeah, it's a match worth seeing, if only for historical purposes. It's not great by any technical stretch. I mean, most of Hogan's matches weren't, with the exception of some of his Japan work. He was able to he was able to basically become the new hero for the World Wrestling Federation right then and there. Crowd wanted it to happen, and it happened. And Vince was smart to latch himself to Hogan. Could have latched himself to Savage, and it would have just worked. But that's another story for another day. They do brawl a bit afterwards, even though there was a tease stretcher job with Sheik. That didn't work. Hogan and Mean Gene have a promo. You know, it's the dream of a lifetime. Terrible Hogan impression, but then Andre comes in and pours foamy champagne on him. So is Putski. So is Rocky Johnson. Yes, Rocky Johnson was still in the company in '84. I totally forgot about that. But they had that fun moment. You know, it was really cool and everything. And it kind of teased the whole thing of Andre recognizing Hogan, but like, hey, you know, we're gonna, you know, they could always just say, hey, all the way back then, he believed in him, but he always wanted that title. I mean, the heel turn wouldn't happen until 3 years later, but there we go. That was cool. And then we get a couple more matches, which we get Rene Goulet versus the renowned murderer Jimmy Snuka. Fuck Jimmy Snuka. I'm glad that he's suffering. The fucking murderer that never got any, you know, comeuppance for his goddamn murdering Nancy. Yeah, that's what Snuka deserves. Vince covering it up probably. Anyway, there was a Superfly Splash for 3 in about just 4 minutes, or just under 4 minutes. Hogan's parents were backstage. I had that little interview. And then Andre the Giant, Rocky Johnson, and Tony Atlas versus the Wild Samoans and Samu. Well, the Wild Samoans, and I believe Samu also. It was okay. It was quick. It was a cool-down match to send the crowd home happy. Andre gets the win. For Hogan's match, this was worth seeing. And yes, there were a couple of mini rants in here, but for Hogan's match, him winning the title, this was worth seeing. If you tune out after the Hogan match, don't blame you. Honestly, after that interview where everybody's celebrating with him, that's really about all you need to see. But overall, there are way worse old MSG shows you could watch. So anyway, that's what I gotta say. Agree, disagree with what I said. Like, share, subscribe. Twitter handle in the description. It's been real honesty with John Ritlin, and I will see you soon.